and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. One night in my early 20s, I had an experience that is still probably the scariest thing I have ever gone through, or at least the scariest thing I have ever thought I went through. I have had bad dreams before. Everyone has. I have had nightmares where you wake up sweating, confused, or relieved that it was not real. But this did not feel like a normal nightmare. I do not remember most dreams for very long after I wake up, even the bad ones. They fade almost immediately, or they turn into scattered pieces that do not make sense by morning. This did not fade. I can still remember the feeling of it. I can still remember the panic. I can still remember trying to force myself awake. And I can still remember looking up from the foot of my bed and seeing something that I hoped was part of a dream, because I do not want to think about what it would mean if it was not. It started with sleep paralysis. I had heard about sleep paralysis before, but I had never really understood how terrifying it could be until it happened to me. You wake up, or at least you think you are awake, but your body does not respond properly. Your mind is conscious enough to know something is wrong, but you cannot move the way you normally can. You are trapped between sleeping and waking, and the more you panic, the worse it feels. That night, I remember lying in bed and becoming aware that I could not move. At first, I tried to stay calm. I remember thinking that I just needed to force myself up. That was all. I told myself that if I could just move one arm, sit up, or lift my head, I would break out of it. I knew I was in bed. I knew it was nighttime. I knew something about my body felt wrong. But I was still trying to think logically. I thought, I just need to force myself up. So I tried. And that is when everything changed. The second I made the effort to move, it felt like I separated from my body. I do not know any better way to explain it. It was not like I sat up physically. It was not like I rolled out of bed. Instead, it felt like whatever part of me was awake, pulled free from the body lying under the blankets. Suddenly, I could see myself. I could see my own body still lying on the bed. That alone was horrifying. I remember the strange shock of looking down and recognizing myself. My body was there, motionless, asleep at the foot of the bed where I had fallen asleep that night. But I was not experiencing the room from inside it anymore. I felt separate from it. I felt above it, or beside it, like I was floating just outside myself. I could see the shape of the bed. I could see the blankets. I could see my body lying there, and I could feel myself drifting slowly away. There was something connecting me to my body. The closest thing I can compare it to is a ghostly umbilical cord. It was not a real cord, not something solid or physical, but I could feel that I was tethered to the body on the bed, like there was some invisible line between the thing I was now and the body I had left behind. I could not see every detail of it, but I knew it was there. That made the whole thing feel even more real. If I had simply been floating in a dream, maybe I would not have noticed it. But the connection made it feel like I was not supposed to go too far. It felt like my body was still mine, but I was being pulled away from it. I tried to move. I tried to control where I was going, but I could not. That was one of the worst parts. I was not floating around the room by choice. I was not exploring. I was not having some peaceful out-of-body experience. I was drifting slowly, helplessly, like I had been caught in a current. I could not control the direction. I could not turn myself around. I could not make myself go back to the bed. I just kept floating. At first, I was still in my room. I remember seeing it from an angle that did not make sense. The furniture looked familiar, but wrong because I was no longer looking at it from where my body should have been. I could see the room as if I were standing somewhere else, except I was not standing. I was just moving through it without touching the floor. Then I started drifting toward the front door. That was when I got truly terrified. I do not know why the front door felt so important. Maybe because it was the way out. Maybe because it meant I was leaving the room, leaving the safe space around my bed, and moving somewhere I did not want to go. I remember realizing that I was getting closer and closer to it, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not stop. The front door was there. I was approaching it slowly, and I had no control over it. Earlier that night, or recently enough that it was still in my mind, I had watched The Fourth Kind. That movie had gotten under my skin more than I expected. It is one of those films that makes you look at the dark differently afterward. Even if you do not believe in aliens or abductions, it leaves you with that uncomfortable thought in the back of your mind, what if something is watching when you are asleep? So as I drifted toward the front door, my brain immediately went there. I thought I was being abducted. It sounds ridiculous when I say it now, but in that moment, it did not feel ridiculous. I was out of my body. I was floating against my will. Something invisible seemed to be pulling me toward the front door. I had just watched a movie about people being taken. My fear took over completely. I remember thinking, this is it. Something is taking me. I got so scared that I closed my eyes. I did not know what else to do. I shut them as tightly as I could and started telling myself, wake up now. Wake up now. Wake up now. Over and over. I was not saying it out loud, at least I do not think I was. I was saying it in my mind with everything I had. I was trying to command myself back into my body. I was trying to force the experience to end. I kept repeating it like a prayer, not because I am especially religious, but because there was nothing else I could think of. Wake up now. Wake up now. Wake up now. Eventually, I did. Or at least I thought I did. I opened my eyes and I was back in bed. At first, I felt this huge wave of relief. I was lying there. I could feel the bed under me. I could feel the blankets. I was in my room again. The floating had stopped. I was not moving toward the front door anymore. I was not looking at myself from outside my body. I was back. But something felt wrong. That night, I had been sleeping at the foot of my bed. I do not remember why exactly. Maybe it was warmer there. Maybe I had fallen asleep watching something and never moved properly. Maybe I had just ended up there without thinking. But I was at the foot of the bed, not up near the headboard where I would normally sleep. I lay there for a second, trying to calm myself down. I told myself it was over. It had been a dream. It had been sleep paralysis. It had been my brain doing something strange while I was half asleep. But then, I felt it. That feeling that someone was watching me. It was immediate. I do not know how to explain it without sounding dramatic, but the room had a presence in it. The kind of feeling where you do not need to hear a sound or see movement to know you are not alone. Every instinct in your body says there is something nearby. Your skin prickles. Your chest tightens. You become afraid to move because you feel like moving will confirm whatever you are trying not to believe. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to ignore it. Then I turned my head upward, and I saw it. Holy fucking shit. At the top end of the bed, just over the edge, there was a black figure. Not a person standing in the room. Not a shadow in the corner. Just the head. It was peeking over the bed. The figure was entirely black. There were no visible eyes, no face I could make out. No hair, clothes, skin, or details. It was just a dark shape, a head-shaped void rising over the edge of the mattress. But even though I could not see eyes, I felt it staring directly at me. That was the most terrifying part. It did not need eyes for me to know its attention was on me. I froze. I remember staring at it, trying to convince myself it was not real. Maybe it was a pile of blankets. Maybe it was a shadow from the room. Maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe I was still in sleep paralysis. Maybe I had not actually woken up at all. But it felt real. It felt more real than a normal dream. I could feel the bed beneath me. I could feel the sheets around me. I could feel my own breathing. The room looked like my room. The darkness looked like normal nighttime darkness. I was awake enough to think clearly, or at least I felt like I was. And there was something peeking over the bed. The shape did not move. It just watched. I do not remember how long I stared at it. It may have only been a few seconds, but it felt much longer. My body was full of panic, but I did not know what to do. I was afraid to sit up because then I would be closer to it. I was afraid to get out of bed because I would have to move past it. I was afraid to call out because I did not know whether it would react. So I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the sheets over my head. I went completely under the blankets and tried to make myself disappear. I remember whispering to myself, just go to sleep. Maybe it's not there. Maybe it'll go away. That was all I had. I did not try to fight it. I did not try to look again. I did not try to turn on a light. I just hid under the sheets and told myself that if I stayed still enough, maybe it would leave me alone. Maybe it was not there. Maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe I would fall asleep and wake up when things were normal again. I was terrified to open my eyes. I do not know when I finally fell asleep. I do not remember hearing the figure move away. I do not remember feeling it leave. I only remember being under the sheets, trying to make myself calm down, trying to slow my breathing, trying not to think about the fact that something might still be at the top of my bed. Eventually, I woke up again. This time, it was morning. The room looked normal. Sunlight was coming in. The dark corners were gone. The air felt ordinary. There was no black figure peeking over the bed. There was no strange feeling in the room. The front door was where it should be. My body was where it should be. Everything was normal again. But I was not normal. I was still shaken. For the rest of the day, I kept replaying it in my head. I kept trying to decide what actually happened. The first part sounded like sleep paralysis. I know that now. I know people can have vivid experiences during sleep paralysis. They can feel trapped, see figures, hear voices, feel pressure on their chest, or think they are leaving their body. The mind can create things that feel completely real when you are stuck between sleep and waking. Maybe that was what happened. Maybe the floating was a dream built around sleep paralysis. Maybe seeing myself in bed was part of that dream. Maybe the ghostly chord was my brain trying to explain the feeling of being separated from my body. Maybe drifting toward the front door was just fear, mixed with the movie I had watched and the idea of being abducted. All of that makes sense. But the second part is what still gets me. The black figure at the bed. The fact that I thought I had woken up. The fact that I could move enough to turn my head and pull the blankets over myself. The fact that I could feel the room around me and think clearly enough to try to reason with myself. Maybe that was a false awakening. I know those can happen too. You think you wake up, but you are still dreaming. The room looks exactly right. You might even feel your body in the bed. You might see normal details around you. But something impossible is there, and only later do you realize you were not truly awake. That is probably the most logical explanation. A false awakening mixed with sleep paralysis. But even knowing that does not make the memory less scary. Because in the moment, I believed I was awake. I believed I had escaped the floating. I believed I had made it back into my body. Then, I looked up and saw something looking over the bed at me. I do not remember many dreams. I barely remember ordinary dreams at all. Even bad dreams usually disappear quickly. But this one stayed with me because it felt different. It had a physical quality that normal dreams do not usually have. I remember the fear in my body. I remember the pressure of the blanket. I remember the way I tried to force myself awake. I remember the panic of drifting toward the front door. And I remember the black head. No eyes, no features. Just darkness, shaped like a head, peeking over the bed and staring at me. That is why it still bothers me. I do not know whether I experienced something paranormal. I do not know whether I had a severe sleep paralysis episode, an out-of-body hallucination, or a false awakening that felt more real than waking life. I do not know whether the movie I watched affected what I saw. Maybe it was all my brain. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a dream that happened to feel unbelievably real. But I know that for those moments I was terrified in a way I had never been before. I felt like I had left my body. I felt like something was taking me toward the front door. Then, I thought I woke up, and something was waiting at the top of my bed. Even now, I do not like sleeping at the foot of a bed. I do not like looking toward a dark doorway after waking up suddenly. And I definitely do not like the idea of something peeking over the edge of a mattress, watching from the darkness where its eyes should be. I was sitting in the first room of my house one day when something happened that still bothers me whenever I think about it. It was just me and my brother home at the time. Nothing unusual was going on. He was in his room playing video games, and I could hear him through the house. The sound of the game was faint, but clear enough that I knew exactly where he was. I could hear the usual things, game sounds, his controller clicking, maybe him talking to someone through his headset, or reacting to whatever was happening on the screen. I was sitting in the first room by myself, just scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet otherwise. It was one of those ordinary quiet days where you are not expecting anything to happen. There was no storm outside, no strange noise before it started, no conversation about ghosts, no scary movie playing in the background. I was not trying to creep myself out. I was not in the dark. I was just sitting there, distracted by my phone, while my brother played games in his room. The first room is close enough to the hallway and kitchen that you can see into parts of the house from where you sit. You can hear people moving around if they go toward the kitchen. You can see the doorway and the wall near it. Normally, if one of us walks through, you notice it right away. At some point, I looked up from my phone and saw a shadow figure on the wall. At first, I did not think anything of it. Shadows can look strange in houses. Light from a window can hit a wall at a weird angle. A passing car can create movement through the blinds. Someone can walk by in another room, and their shape can briefly stretch across a wall. The first thing I thought was that it had to be my brother. It looked like someone standing near the doorway. Not close enough that I could make out a clear face or clothing, but close enough that it had the rough shape of a person. It was dark against the wall, like someone was just out of view. I assumed my brother had come out of his room and was standing there for some reason, but there was something strange about the way it moved. You know how when someone is trying very hard to stand still, they are never actually perfectly still? Even when you are standing in one place, you shift your weight a little. Your body sways slightly. Your shoulders move. Your head might tilt without you even realizing it. There is always some tiny movement that tells you a real person is there. That was what this shadow was doing. It was swaying slightly. Not moving normally, not walking through the room, not stepping forward or backward. It was just standing there with that faint, almost natural movement a person makes when they are trying to stay still. That was why I assumed it was my brother. I called his name. No response. I looked back down at my phone for a second, then looked up again. The shadow was still there. It had not moved away. It had not stepped into the room. It was still in the same place, still doing that tiny swaying motion. I called my brother's name again. Still nothing. At that point, I started getting annoyed more than scared. I thought maybe he was trying to mess with me. Brothers do that. Maybe he had left his room quietly and was standing there waiting for me to react. Maybe he was trying to creep me out because he knew I was alone in the first room. I called his name again, louder. Nothing, the shadow stayed there. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. Something about it started to feel wrong. If it was my brother, why was he not answering me? He was close enough that he would have heard me. The house was not that large. I could hear him gaming from his room, so he could definitely hear me calling his name from the first room. Then, I heard him. Not from the hallway. Not from near the doorway. From his room. I could hear the game still going. That was when I started feeling uneasy. I looked at the shadow again and tried to tell myself it was just the trick of the light. Maybe it was my own shadow somehow. Maybe the light was catching something in the room. Maybe I was staring too hard and turning a normal shape into something human. But the thing was still there, still swaying, still shaped like a person, standing close to the doorway. I did not know what to do, so I called my brother's name again. This time, I was louder. There was still no answer from the shadow. Then, all of a sudden, a finger curled around the door. That was the moment everything changed. It was not just a shadow on the wall anymore. I saw an actual finger come around the edge of the door, like someone was standing on the other side and slowly gripping the frame. It was one finger at first, curling inward from behind the door. The kind of movement you would expect if someone was hiding and trying to peek around the corner without showing their whole body. I froze. I remember looking at it and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind was moving too fast. I thought maybe it really was my brother after all. Maybe he had somehow come out without me hearing him. Maybe he had been standing there the whole time, trying to scare me. But I could still hear him gaming in his room. The game sounds were still there. The fingers stayed curled around the door, and the shadow was still on the wall. It was like there was someone standing just outside the room, but I could not see the rest of them. Then I heard noises in the kitchen. It sounded like someone was using it. Not just one random creak or a cabinet settling. It sounded like movement. Like someone was walking around, touching things, maybe opening something, maybe shifting objects. The kind of ordinary kitchen sounds that would not bother you if you knew someone else was home. But there were only supposed to be two people in the house, me and my brother. And my brother was still in his room. At that point, I started yelling for him, not casually calling his name anymore. I shouted it. I yelled his name over and over because I needed him to come out. I needed another person in the room. I needed to know I was not imagining it. The finger was around the door. The shadow was there. The kitchen sounded occupied. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely focus. Then I heard him answer. "I'm coming." His voice came from his room. That was when I knew for sure he had not been standing in the doorway. He had been in his room the entire time. I heard movement from his room. I heard him getting up, probably confused because I was shouting so loudly. Then he came into the first room. The second he stepped in, the shadow disappeared. It was just gone. No fading slowly. No movement away. No person stepping back into the hallway. One moment it was there, and the next it was not. The finger was gone too. The doorway was empty. The kitchen went quiet. My brother stood there looking at me like I had lost my mind. I tried to explain what happened. I told him there had been a shadow on the wall. I told him I thought it was him. I told him I had called his name, and it would not answer. I told him a finger curled around the door. I told him it sounded like someone was in the kitchen. He did not believe me. He called me delusional. That was probably the worst part. Not because I expected him to believe it immediately, but because I knew how it sounded. I knew it sounded impossible. A shadow figure, a finger around a door, noises in the kitchen, then everything disappearing when someone else walked into the room. It sounds like something from a horror movie or a story someone tells to scare people. But I know what I saw. I was not asleep. I was not waking up from a dream. I was sitting in the first room, awake, on my phone. I could hear my brother playing video games in his room before it happened. I could hear him while the shadow was there. I could hear him answer from his room when I started yelling. There was no way he had been the figure by the doorway and in his room at the same time. That is what keeps me from writing it off completely. I have only had 2 or 3 paranormal-type experiences in my whole life. I am not someone who sees shadows every day or thinks every noise in a house is a ghost. I do not jump to supernatural explanations. I know houses make noises. I know people can misinterpret things, especially when they are distracted, tired, or anxious. But this did not feel like a normal misunderstanding. The shadow was there long enough for me to study it. It moved in a way that looked almost human. I called my brother's name more than once. The finger curled around the door. The kitchen sounded like it was being used, and my brother answered from his room. I have tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe the shadow was caused by a light from outside. Maybe it was a reflection from a television, a car passing, or something moving beyond the window. Maybe I was seeing the outline of furniture in a strange way. Maybe the movement I thought I saw was my own eyes adjusting, or my brain trying to make sense of darkness. But I still cannot explain the finger. It was not a vague shape. It was not just the shadow looking like a hand. It was a finger curling slowly around the edge of the door. I remember the exact feeling of seeing it and thinking, somebody is there. And then the kitchen noises started. I did not go into the kitchen alone to investigate. I did not want to. I was too scared, and once my brother came in, everything had gone quiet anyway. We may have checked around afterward, but there was no one there. No open door. No sign that someone had come into the house. Nothing knocked over. Nothing obviously missing. Just an empty kitchen. An empty hallway. An empty doorway. My brother kept calling me delusional, probably because he had not seen any of it. From his point of view, he had been in his room playing a game, heard me yelling his name, came out, and found me panicking over something he could not see. I do not blame him for being skeptical. I would probably be skeptical too if someone told me the same story. But it still made me feel stupid and alone in the moment. I wanted him to say he had heard something in the kitchen, I wanted him to say he had seen movement in the hallway before he came out. I wanted some sign that I had not imagined the entire thing. Instead, there was nothing. After that, I kept thinking about the shadow. It was not a clear person. It did not have a face. It did not have clothes I could describe. It was only a human-shaped darkness against the wall, swaying slightly like someone trying to stay still. That is what made it so unsettling. If it had been obvious, maybe it would have been easier to explain. If it had been a stranger standing in the doorway, I could have called the police. If it had been my brother, I could have yelled at him for trying to scare me. If it had been an animal, I could have figured out how it got inside. But it was none of those things. It was something that looked like a person without being one. Something that moved just enough to make me think it was alive. Something that stood there silently while I called my brother's name. Sometimes I think the most unsettling part of these experiences is not the moment itself. It is what happens afterward. You replay it over and over. You start questioning every detail. You wonder whether you were tired, whether you were distracted, whether the light was different than you remember, whether you accidentally made the whole thing bigger in your mind. You want to find the mistake. You want to find the ordinary answer. Because the ordinary answer is easier to live with. Maybe I was looking at a shadow from the hallway light. Maybe my brain turned it into my brother because I knew he was the only other person home. Maybe the finger was a trick of perspective. Maybe kitchen noises came from the refrigerator, pipes, cabinets settling, or something else that sounded more human because I was already scared. Those explanations are possible. But when I think about it, I still remember the order things happened in. I saw the shadow. I thought it was my brother. I called his name. It did not answer. A finger curled around the door. I heard movement in the kitchen. I started yelling. My brother answered from his room. He came into the first room, and the shadow disappeared. I cannot explain that. I do not know what it was. I do not know whether it was something paranormal, a strange trick of light and sound, or a moment where my mind interpreted ordinary things in the worst possible way. But I know I was scared. And I know that for those few minutes, I was convinced that someone, or something, was standing just outside the room, waiting for me to notice it. When I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I used to sleep on the couch because I was scared of my room and the hallway outside of it. I know that probably sounds normal for a little kid. A lot of children get scared of sleeping alone, especially when their room is at the end of a dark hallway. But even then, I felt like my fear was more than just not wanting to be by myself. We lived in a double-wide trailer, so it was not a big house at all. Everything was close together. You could hear people walking from one end to the other. You could hear doors open and close. You could hear the television in another room, the bathroom fan, the refrigerator kicking on, and the little noises that happen in every home after everyone is supposed to be asleep. The layout was simple. There was the living room, my parents' room nearby, and a hallway leading toward the bedrooms. My room was down that hallway, and even though the trailer was small, that hallway always felt too long at night. During the day, it was nothing. It was just a narrow stretch between rooms. You could walk down it in a few steps. There was nothing special about it. But after dark, it felt different. The living room had more light. There was usually a lamp, light from the television, or at least some glow coming from outside. And most importantly, it was closer to my parents' room. Sleeping on the couch made me feel like I was safer. I was still able to see the hallway from there, but I did not have to be alone at the far end of it. I could hear my parents nearby. I knew their bedroom was only a short distance away. When you are little, that kind of distance matters. A few feet can feel like protection. I do not remember exactly when I started refusing to sleep in my own room. It may have happened slowly. Maybe I started getting nervous when the lights were turned off. Maybe I had bad dreams. Maybe I heard sounds in the hallway and could not explain them. I only remember that for a while the couch became my safe place. My parents probably thought I was being dramatic. They likely assumed I just wanted to stay up later, watch TV, or avoid going to bed. Parents hear all kinds of childhood fears. A closet is scary. A window is scary. A dark hallway is scary. Something under the bed is scary. Adults know children can imagine things, especially when they are tired. But to me, it was real. There was something about looking down that hallway from the couch that made my stomach twist. I would try not to stare at it. I would keep the blanket tucked around myself and watch television until I was too tired to stay awake. Sometimes I would turn my back toward the hall and face the couch cushions because it felt better not to see the darkness directly. I could still feel it there, though. The hallway was always there. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I do not remember hearing a sound. I do not remember having a nightmare that woke me. I just opened my eyes. The room was dark, but not completely black. There was enough light in the living room for me to make out the furniture, the front of the couch, and the doorway to my parents' room. Then I looked toward the hallway. There was something standing there. It was a large, pitch-black figure. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. I was still half asleep, and when you wake up in the dark, your eyes take a second to make sense of the room. You expect shadows. You expect furniture to look strange. You expect a coat hanging over a chair to seem like a person until your vision clears. But this was not a normal shadow. It was standing in the hallway, facing me. The figure was big, bigger than I was, obviously, but it also felt taller and broader than any person I knew. It did not have a face that I could see. It did not have eyes, clothes, hands, or any features I could make out. It was just black. Not dark like a person standing in low light, but dark in a way that seemed to swallow the little bit of light that should have touched it. It was the blackest thing in the room. The hallway behind it was dark, too, but I could still see the difference between the walls, the doorway, and the shadows around it. The figure was darker than all of that. It had a shape, a head, shoulders, and a body, but no details. It looked like a person-shaped space where all the light had disappeared, and it was facing directly toward me. I remember being so scared that I could not move. That is one of the strongest parts of the memory. I did not scream. I did not call for my parents. I did not sit up. I did not jump off the couch and run to their room. I just froze under the blanket, staring at the hallway. I was little, and I did not know what to do. The figure did not move. It did not walk toward me. It did not raise an arm. It did not make a sound. It just stood there. That somehow made it worse. If it had moved, maybe I could have understood it as a person. If it had spoken, maybe I could have recognized the voice. If it had made some obvious threatening sound, maybe I could have screamed or run. But it did nothing. It simply stood in the hallway and faced me. I remember feeling like it knew I was awake. I could not see eyes, but I felt watched. It was the kind of fear that goes straight through you. Your body knows something is wrong before you can explain why. My chest felt tight. I did not want to breathe too loudly. I did not want to move the blanket. I did not want it to know I was looking at it, even though it already seemed to be looking at me. I pulled the covers over my head. That was all I could think to do. I hid under the blanket and hoped it would go away. I know that sounds childish, but I was a child. When you are 5 or 6 years old, A blanket can feel like a wall. It can feel like a shield. You tell yourself that whatever is outside cannot see you if you cannot see it. You tell yourself that if you stay perfectly still, it might leave. So I stayed there under the covers, probably holding my breath, probably crying quietly, waiting for something to happen. I do not remember how long I stayed that way. It might have been a few seconds. It might have been several minutes. When you are terrified, time stops making sense. Every moment feels long because you are waiting for something to touch you, speak to you, or move closer. Eventually, I got enough courage to peek out. The hallway was empty. The figure was gone. There was nothing there except darkness, the narrow walls, and the normal shape of the trailer. I remember staring at the spot where it had been, expecting it to appear again. I did not trust that it was really gone. I kept looking toward the hallway, scared that if I looked away, it would come back. But I never saw it again. At least, not in the same way. That one night was enough. After that, I could not sleep comfortably on the couch anymore either. The living room had felt safer because it was closer to my parents, but the couch also gave me a direct view of the hallway. Once I had seen that figure standing there, the hallway became worse than it had ever been before. It was no longer just a dark part of the trailer. It was the place where it had stood. My parents tried to explain it away. They told me it was probably my dad. That was the answer they gave whenever I brought it up. Maybe he had gotten up in the night. Maybe he had been walking through the hallway. Maybe I saw him in the dark and got scared because I was half asleep. But I knew it was not him. Their bedroom door was shut. I could see it from the couch. The door was closed, and the hallway figure was standing outside it. My dad was not a giant black shape. He was not standing perfectly still in the dark, facing me without moving or speaking. He did not have a body that seemed to absorb all the light around it. Even as a little kid, I knew the difference between my dad and whatever I saw. It was not him. I do not know whether my parents truly believed me. They probably thought I had been dreaming. Maybe they thought I had seen a shadow in the hallway and my imagination made it into something scary. Maybe they did not want to make a big deal out of it because they did not want me to become more afraid. But I did not feel believed, and that made me feel even more alone. After that night, I started sneaking into my parents' room. I did not always wake them up. I did not always tell them I was there. I would quietly get off the couch or out of my room and creep into their bedroom. Then, I would sleep on the floor beside their bed. Being close to them helped. I would lie down on the floor, usually with a blanket or pillow if I could manage to bring one without making noise. Sometimes I would just curl up there because I was too scared to go back to the couch. I needed to hear them breathing. I needed to know that there were adults nearby. I needed the hallway to be farther away from me. They may not have fully understood why I kept doing it, but I could not explain it any better than I already had. I had seen something. I knew what I saw. And I did not want to be alone where it could see me again. Eventually, my parents did something that made me wonder whether they believed me more than they said. They hung crosses on the hallway wall. Not just one, a lot of them. I remember thinking there were around 10 crosses, maybe more, spaced along the hallway wall. It was a strange thing to see in such a small trailer. The hallway was not big, but suddenly it had all these crosses on the wall, like they were trying to cover every bit of the space. Nobody sat me down and said, "We believe you." Nobody explained exactly why they were putting them up. But as a kid, I noticed. I knew the crosses were not there before. I knew they appeared after I told them about the black figure. And after the crosses went up, I never saw it again. Maybe that was a coincidence. Maybe I was older and less afraid. Maybe I stopped sleeping on the couch as much. Maybe whatever I saw that night had been a shadow, a dream, or a sleep-related hallucination. And it simply never happened again, because it had only happened once. I understand all of those explanations now. I know that children can wake from nightmares and still see dream images for a few seconds. I know shadows can look like people. I know a dark hallway in a small trailer can feel enormous when you are little. I know that memory changes over time, especially memories from childhood. But I also know how that figure made me feel. It did not feel like a normal shadow. It did not feel like my dad. It did not feel like a dream while it was happening. It felt like something was standing there. Something that did not move. Something that had no face. Something that was blacker than the dark around it. Something that was looking at me. Even now, hallways make me uncomfortable. It sounds silly, because a hallway is just a hallway. It is only a passage between rooms. But there is something about a dark hallway at night that still puts me on edge. Maybe it is because of that trailer. Maybe it is because I spent so much time trying not to look toward that one narrow stretch of darkness. A hallway gives you nowhere to hide. It is long enough for someone, or something, to stand at the far end. It is narrow enough that you have to walk through it to get anywhere. And when the lights are off, you cannot always tell where the darkness ends and where a shape begins. I have lived in other places since then. Bigger homes, different rooms, different layouts. Nothing else happened like that. I never saw the black figure again. I never saw another person-shaped shadow standing in a hallway. But I still remember that night. I remember waking up on the couch. I remember the little bit of light in the living room. I remember looking down the hallway. And I remember seeing something standing there, completely still, facing me. Whatever it was, it did not look human. And even though everyone told me it was probably my dad, I knew it was not. When I was in middle school, I had one of the strangest experiences of my life while walking through a cemetery. It was not late at night, and I was not trying to scare myself. I was not with friends telling ghost stories, and I was not there because I believed the place was haunted. It was just a cemetery I was walking through, the kind of place that feels quiet even during the day. I remember the paths, the rows of headstones, the grass, and the strange stillness that cemeteries always seem to have. There can be traffic nearby, birds in the trees, people walking in the distance, but the cemetery itself still feels separate from everything around it. At that age, I did not really think too deeply about death or ghosts. Cemeteries were creepy mostly because they were cemeteries. You grow up hearing stories about them, seeing them in scary movies, and knowing that they are places where people are buried, but you do not always understand what that means until you are older. To me, it was just a quiet place to walk through. I probably noticed the old headstones, the flowers, the small decorations left by families, and the way the trees made shadows across the paths. There was another person in the cemetery that day, too. A woman was walking her dog through the grounds. That did not seem strange. People walk dogs through cemeteries all the time because they are usually quiet, open, and away from traffic. I noticed her mostly because she was one of the only other people around. The dog was with her, moving along beside her like a normal dog on a walk. Everything about the scene felt ordinary at first. Then I saw him. He was entirely white. Not just pale-skinned. I mean, everything about him appeared white. His body looked white. His clothes were white. The whole figure had this strange, washed-out appearance, like someone had taken all the color out of him. He did not look like a person dressed in ordinary modern clothes. He was wearing what I can only describe as an old prospector outfit. It looked like the kind of clothes you would expect from an old photograph. a historical movie, or a person from the Gold Rush era. I cannot say for sure if it was an authentic outfit, because I was in middle school and did not know enough about historical clothing to judge it properly. But that was the impression it gave me. It looked deliberate. He did not just have an old hat or some unusual jacket. He looked fully dressed like someone from another time. The outfit seemed complete, as if he had stepped out of a different century and into that cemetery without anyone questioning it. There was something almost theatrical about him, but at the same time, it did not feel like a costume. It did not look like a person heading to a party, a reenactment, or some event. It looked too real for that. At first, I was confused, not scared. I remember looking at him and trying to decide what I was seeing. Maybe there was some kind of historical event nearby. Maybe he was an actor. Maybe he was just an older man with a strange style. I was trying to find a normal explanation, because that is what people do when something does not fit. You do not immediately think, this is a ghost. You think, there has to be a reason. There has to be something I am missing. But then he walked toward the woman and her dog. The woman was still walking through the cemetery, and I watched as the white figure approached her. He moved normally. He was not floating. He was not moving too fast or too slowly. He walked like any other person would walk, but there was something unsettling about the way he did it. Maybe it was because of the white clothes. Maybe it was because he seemed so out of place. Or maybe it was because I could already feel that something about him was wrong. He stopped near the woman and her dog. The dog reacted first. It started barking hard, the kind of barking that is not playful or curious. It was barking like it was scared, angry, or trying to warn its owner. Its body language changed completely. It was not just making one or two little noises. It was barking its head off, focused on the man in white. Dogs can bark at strangers, of course, especially in quiet places, but there was something intense about the way this dog reacted. It seemed like it did not want him near them. The woman looked terrified, too. Her face went pale, not just surprised pale, but genuinely frightened. She looked like she had seen something she did not understand. The man had not attacked her. He had not yelled at her. He had not done anything openly threatening. He simply approached her, reached into his pocket, and held something out. I could not see exactly what he gave her. That part is still a mystery to me. It might have been something small, a coin, a piece of paper, a tiny object. Maybe it was nothing more than an empty gesture. But from where I was standing, it looked like he reached into his pocket and handed something to the woman and her dog. He extended his hand toward them, and she reacted like she did not know what to do. The dog kept barking. The woman looked frozen, and the man in white just stood there calmly. What disturbed me was how normal he acted. He did not seem bothered by the barking. He did not look angry or embarrassed. He did not say anything that I could hear. He simply handed over whatever was in his pocket, then turned away from the woman and began walking off. As he walked away, he started whistling. That detail has stayed with me for years. It was not loud, but I could hear it clearly enough. He walked away from the woman and her dog while whistling like this was all completely ordinary, like he had just run into someone he knew, handed them something, and was heading home. The sound of the whistling made the whole thing feel even stranger, because it was so casual. The woman was pale. The dog was barking wildly. I was standing there trying to understand why a man dressed entirely in white, like an old prospector, was walking around a cemetery. And he was whistling. I watched him because I could not stop watching him. At that point, I was no longer thinking he was just a strange person. Something about the scene had crossed over into the kind of fear where your body realizes something is wrong before your mind can explain why. The woman's reaction, the dog's reaction, the unusual outfit, the white appearance, and the calm whistling all added up to something that did not feel normal. I kept my eyes on him as he walked away. He moved toward the side of a car. There was a car parked nearby, and I watched him approach it. At first, I assumed he was going to get inside. That was the obvious thing. Maybe he had been visiting someone's grave. Maybe he was leaving. Maybe the entire strange scene had a normal explanation after all, and he was simply going back to his vehicle. But he did not open the door. He did not reach for the handle. He did not walk around the car. He walked straight into the side of it. Not into the open door. Not behind it. Not around it. Through it. I watched him disappear through the side of the car door and come out the other side. He did not get in the car. He did not pass behind it in a way that made it look like he vanished. He literally walked through it. One moment, he was on one side of the car. Then, his body moved into the door as if the metal was not there. Then, he came out on the other side. I stood there, staring. I do not know how long it took my brain to catch up. It was one of those moments where you see something that cannot be true. And for a second, you are not scared because you are too confused. You just keep looking at the place where it happened, waiting for reality to correct itself. Maybe he was behind the car. Maybe there was some trick of distance. Maybe I had looked away at the wrong moment. Maybe the car was positioned differently than I thought. But I had watched him. I had been following him with my eyes the entire time. He walked toward the side of the car, passed through the door, and came out the other side. There was no way to explain it as someone simply entering the vehicle. He did not open anything. He did not stop. He did not even slow down. He just continued walking as if the car was not solid. Then he was gone. I do not remember seeing him walk away after that. I remember the moment of him moving through the car more than anything else. That is the image burned into my mind. The white figure in old prospector clothes, whistling through a cemetery, passing directly through the side of a parked car like it was fog. For a long time, I tried to explain it. I was in middle school. I knew I could have misunderstood something. Kids can misjudge distance. Eyes can play tricks, especially in a cemetery with trees, shadows, bright sunlight, and old stone everywhere. Maybe the car door was open, and I did not see it. Maybe there was a reflection. Maybe he passed behind the car, and my mind filled in the rest. Maybe I had been daydreaming or not paying attention properly. But the more I thought about it, the less those explanations made sense. The car was there. The man was there. I watched him walk toward it. I watched him pass through it. I did not just catch a glimpse from far away. I was focused on him because the woman and dog had reacted so strongly. I was already watching every movement he made. I was not distracted. I was not looking at my phone. I was not talking to anyone. The whole thing happened right in front of me. And the woman's face was pale. The dog was barking. That matters to me because it means I was not the only person who noticed something strange. I do not know what the woman saw exactly. Maybe she just thought he was an odd stranger. Maybe the dog reacted because it did not like him. Maybe she never saw him go through the car. I do not know. I never spoke to her. I wish I had. Part of me wishes I had walked over afterward and asked what he had handed her. I wish I had asked whether she knew him. I wish I had asked why she looked so frightened. But I was young, scared, and confused. I did not know what to say. I did not want to sound crazy. So I stayed quiet and carried the memory with me. That is one of the worst parts of seeing something strange. You know that if you tell people, they are probably going to try to explain it away. They will say you imagined it. They will say it was a costume. They will say it was a trick of the light. They will say the dog was just barking because dogs bark. They will say the woman was pale because you imagined that too. They will say the man walked behind the car and your memory changed over time. Maybe they are right. I cannot prove what I saw. I do not have a video. I do not have a photograph. I do not know the woman's name. I cannot go back and find the man because he was gone before I could even process what happened. All I have is the memory, and the memory has stayed sharp in the places that matter. I remember the white. I remember how unnatural it looked, his whole body and clothes washed in pale color. I remember the prospector outfit. I remember the dog losing its mind. I remember the woman's face going pale. I remember him reaching into his pocket and handing something over. I remember him turning away and whistling. And I remember him walking through the car door. That is why it still haunts me. It is not like a normal scary story where something chases you or tries to hurt you. He never came toward me. He never spoke to me. He never even seemed aware that I was watching. But the scene felt like I had accidentally witnessed something I was not supposed to see, like I had caught a piece of another reality playing out in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The cemetery already made it feel more unsettling. A strange man in old clothing walking around a supermarket parking lot would be weird, but maybe you could explain it. A strange man dressed entirely in white, walking through a cemetery, interacting with a frightened woman and dog, then passing through a car, feels different. It feels like the setting and the figure belong together in a way I do not want to think about too much. Maybe he was connected to someone buried there. Maybe the prospector clothes were from some period connected to the cemetery's history. Maybe he was not a ghost at all, and there is some explanation I will never understand. But when I think about him, I do not picture a normal person. I picture someone who was not fully there. Someone who looked human enough to walk, whistle, and reach into his pocket, but not human enough to be stopped by a car door. There are moments from childhood that become blurry with time. You forget what people said. You forget the weather. You forget what you were doing before or after. But some moments stay clear because they are too strange to fade. This is one of those moments for me. I can still see the cemetery. I can still see the woman holding on to her dog. I can still see the man in white walking away like nothing had happened. And I can still see him go through the car. I do not know what he was. I only know that he was there, and then he was not. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. When I moved back to the middle of nowhere about 8 years ago, it felt like I had stepped out of one life and into another. I had grown up in that area, surrounded by woods, hills, long drives, fenced property, and the kind of quiet you only really notice after living somewhere busy. But for years, I had been living and working in a major metro area. I worked in law enforcement, so my normal life had been noise, traffic, calls, people, lights, alarms, and constantly being aware of what was around me. Then my wife and I decided to move back to where I had grown up. We had land and were building a house, or more accurately, a house that would eventually feel like a cabin because of where it was located. Until the place was finished, we were living in a camper on the property. It was temporary, but temporary can stretch longer than you expect when you are building something from the ground up. At the time, my wife was newly pregnant, and our oldest child was around 3 years old. So it was a strange, busy stage of life already. We had a little boy who was still learning how to speak clearly, learning how the world worked, and saying random things that sometimes made perfect sense and sometimes made no sense at all. My wife was pregnant, we were trying to build a home, and we were living in a camper in the middle of the woods. There was a lot happening. The property itself was isolated. We had a large clearing where the camper sat and where the house was being built. The woods surrounded the clearing on most sides. You could see open space around the camper during the day, but beyond that, it quickly became trees, brush, hills, and narrow paths that disappeared into the woods. The closest people were about half a mile away. Everything around us was fenced with barbed wire. That gave the land a sense of separation. It was our property, and beyond it were more properties, fields, woods, and quiet stretches of land where you could go a long time without seeing another person. During the day, it was peaceful. At night, it was darker than anything you get in a city. There were no streetlights, no traffic passing nearby, no neighbors' porch lights glowing through trees, no sound of people walking around outside. Just the camper, the clearing, the construction site, and the woods. There was a path that led up into the hills on our property. It started off the clearing and went into the trees. It was not some dramatic mountain trail, but it climbed enough that once you went far enough up it, you disappeared from view. The trees closed in around it. The path was familiar enough to me because I grew up around land like that. I knew what woods sounded like. I knew what animals sounded like. I knew how shadows moved at dusk. I knew that the woods can look strange when the light starts fading. Still, there was something about that path. It always seemed darker than the rest of the property. Even during the day, it had a different feel because the trees grew closer together there. The clearing got sunlight. The camper got sunlight. The build site got sunlight. But the trail up into the hills seemed to swallow the light faster than it should. At dusk, it was usually the first place to become shadowed. A few weeks before the night everything happened. Our son started saying strange things. He was 3, so we did not take it too seriously at first. Kids say weird things all the time. They repeat things they heard somewhere. Mix dreams with real life. Imagine people. Talk about monsters. And make statements that sound much deeper than they probably mean. But he had started telling us that something was going to happen soon. He said it more than once. Not in the same exact way every time, but enough that it stayed in my mind. He would say things like, "It's going to happen soon," or "It's happening all around us." Sometimes it seemed like he was talking to himself. Sometimes he would say it to my wife or me in a completely calm voice, as if he were describing something obvious. At first, we brushed it off. Kids are wild. Kids get ideas in their heads. They say things that sound creepy because adults hear them with adult ears. A 3-year-old can say, "Something is happening," because he saw a bug, heard a noise, or remembered a dream from the night before. It does not always mean anything. Still, after he said it enough times, we noticed it. We did not sit around talking about ghosts or anything like that. We were not trying to put scary ideas in his head. We were busy with real life. We had construction happening, we had a toddler to look after, we had a pregnancy, and we had a camper that was too small for the amount of life happening inside it. But every now and then, one of us would mention the things he had been saying. Then came the evening that changed how I felt about that land for a while. It was around dusk, but there was still plenty of light outside. It was not fully dark yet. I could see across the clearing. I could see the trees. I could see the path leading up into the woods. The sky still had that late evening brightness, even though the sun had started to drop lower. My son and I were outside playing. He was running around, laughing, doing the normal things a 3-year-old does when he has space to move. He would run away from me, turn around, laugh, come back, then run somewhere else. Kids that age have endless energy, especially when they are outside. He was happy. I was watching him, playing with him, probably enjoying the fact that we were out there together on our own land. It should have been an ordinary memory. I can still picture him running around the clearing, moving through the grass and dirt, laughing, looking back at me to make sure I was watching. He was only a few feet away most of the time. I was not letting him wander toward the woods or get too far from the camper. I was paying attention. Then, something changed. He suddenly ran up to me. He was close enough that I had seen him only seconds before. He had not been out of my sight for long. He reached his arms up for me to pick him up, and I immediately noticed that he was upset. Not crying yet, not screaming, but upset in a way that felt different from a child tripping, getting tired, or being frustrated. I picked him up. I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me, then looked past me toward the path leading into the woods. Then he asked, "Who is that man?" I turned and looked toward the trail. There was no one there, at least not that I could see. The path was empty. The trees were still. I could see the opening where the trail began, the dirt or grass leading into the woods, and the darker trees beyond it. But I did not see a person. Before I could say anything, my son looked back toward the path and suddenly yelled, "Who is that man looking at me?" His voice changed completely. It was not a playful question. It was fear. He started yelling louder. Why are his eyes like that? I remember the way he said it because it was not the kind of thing a 3-year-old normally says when he sees something unfamiliar. He was not saying, "There's a man," or "Who is that?" the way a child might ask about a stranger. He sounded terrified. Then he said it again. "Who is that man?" And then again, louder, "What is wrong with his eyes?" At that point, I was looking directly at the path. I was holding my son close to me, and I was scanning the area the way I had been trained to scan an area for years. I was not daydreaming. I was not distracted. I was not someone who had spent his life in isolated woods and automatically assumed every strange thing was supernatural. My first thought was that there was a person there. That was all. Someone had entered the property. Someone was standing in the trees. Someone had come through the fence, walked up the trail, or somehow gotten close enough that my child saw him before I did. I looked for movement. I looked for a body shape. I looked for a face, clothing, a shadow, anything that did not belong. But there was nothing. Then the path changed. I do not know how else to describe it. It had been dusk. There was enough light around us to see. The clearing was still visible. The camper was visible. The trees around the edge of the property were visible. The sky was still giving off enough light that there should have been no place that was completely black. But the path itself became pitch dark. Not shadowed, not dim, pitch black. It was like all the light had disappeared from that one section of land. The trail that had been visible a second earlier was suddenly a solid black opening in the woods. Not the normal darkness of trees at dusk. It looked more like a hole cut into the world. Like there was no light reaching it at all. That was when my body reacted. My blood went cold. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up at once. I had felt fear before. I had been in dangerous situations before. Working in law enforcement means you learn the difference between being nervous and being in real danger. There are moments when your body knows something before your mind catches up. Your hearing changes. Your vision narrows. Time feels strange. Your focus locks onto one point, and everything else disappears. That is what happened to me. My vision narrowed down toward that path. My ears started ringing. I could still see the clearing around me, but it felt like everything outside the trail was fading away. My attention was locked on that black space in the woods. I could not see anyone there. I could not hear anyone there. There was no voice, no footsteps, no branch breaking, no animal moving, nothing. But every instinct I had told me something was wrong. It was the same feeling I had experienced on the job during moments when I knew I could die. The same sudden awareness I had felt in real situations where there was a weapon involved, or where I had been in a fight and knew I was in serious danger. It was not imagination. It was a physical response. The kind you cannot fake and cannot talk yourself out of while it is happening. I stood there holding my son, staring at the path, and I knew one thing clearly. I needed to get him inside. I snapped out of it enough to turn around and run toward the camper. I did not walk. I did not stand there trying to be calm. I ran. My son was still upset, and I carried him straight to my wife. I got inside, put him in her arms, and told her something was wrong. I do not remember exactly what I said because my mind was still racing. I only remember moving quickly, trying to keep control of the situation. Then I grabbed my rifle. At that point, I was thinking like I had always thought in dangerous situations. My son had seen a man. I had felt something that made every survival instinct in me go off. The path had gone dark in a way I could not explain, but I was still trying to find a real explanation. Someone could have been there. A trespasser. A person hiding in the woods. Someone who had gotten through the fence. Someone watching us. The land was isolated. We were a half-mile from the nearest people. There were no houses close enough for someone to casually wander over. If there was a stranger near the camper and my family, I needed to know. So I went back outside. I faced the path. I searched. I went through the woods and up the hillside, checking the areas where someone could have been standing. I looked for footprints. I looked for broken branches. I looked for disturbed brush. I looked for any sign of a person being there. I checked places someone might hide. I checked the trail. I checked the trees beside it. I checked the surrounding area. I found nothing. No person. No sound. No sign of movement. No footprints that did not belong. No broken fence. No clothing caught on wire. No discarded item. No evidence that anyone had been on the property at all. That was almost harder to deal with than finding someone. If I had found a stranger, at least there would have been an answer. I could have said my son saw a real person. I could have said my instincts were right. I could have said the darkness on the path was my mind reacting to a dangerous situation. But there was nothing. The woods were just woods again. The path looked normal. The light had returned to the area, or maybe it had never actually changed and my mind had done something strange. I do not know. But when I looked again, it was not that impossible black hole in the trees anymore. It was simply a path leading up through shadowed woods. Still, I could not shake what happened. I could not shake the way my son had reacted. 3-year-olds can imagine things. I know that. They can see a tree branch and call it a monster. They can hear an animal and invent a person. They can say strange things without understanding what they mean. But he was not casually imagining something that night. He was scared. He had reached up for me to pick him up. He had looked toward the path and asked who the man was. He had yelled about the man's eyes. Then he had stopped talking about it entirely. After that night, he never mentioned the man again. He never brought up the weird statements about something happening soon. He never said, "It's happening all around us." Again, that part has always bothered me too. It was like whatever he had been sensing, whatever he had been talking about for those few weeks before, ended that night. Once the incident happened, it was over. He did not talk about the man. He did not ask to avoid the path. He did not have recurring nightmares that we knew of. He just went back to being a normal kid. But I did not go back to feeling normal about that clearing for a while. For weeks afterward, I had trouble standing outside near dusk. I would look toward the path without meaning to. I would notice the way the darkness gathered between the trees. I would listen for things I had never cared about before. Every time my son played outside, I watched the woods more closely. I did not tell myself it was a ghost. I did not decide it was something supernatural. I have never been able to say exactly what it was. Maybe there had been a person there who got away before I searched. Maybe someone was watching us from deeper in the woods. Maybe my son saw a shape, an animal, or a shadow that looked human. Maybe I read his fear and reacted to it so strongly that my own senses distorted what I saw. Maybe the path was not actually blacker than the rest of the woods. Maybe the sudden fear narrowed my vision and made it seem that way. Maybe the ringing in my ears and tunnel vision were a stress response, triggered by my son's panic and my own instincts. All of that is possible. But I have been in actual dangerous situations. I know what it feels like when your body warns you that something is wrong. That night felt like that. It was not the slow fear you get from watching a horror movie or hearing a strange noise in an empty house. It was immediate. Sharp, physical. It felt like every part of me was telling me to protect my child and get away from that path. And I still do not know why. I moved back to the woods because I wanted space, quiet, and a different kind of life for my family. I wanted to get away from the noise and pressure of the city. I wanted my kids to grow up with land, trees, fresh air, and room to run. Most of the time, that is exactly what it has been. But that one evening still stays with me. A 3-year-old boy running around happily in the clearing. A path disappearing into the hills. A sudden look of fear. Who is that man? Why are his eyes like that? A section of woods turning black. And a feeling I had only ever known before when I believed I was in real danger. I never found anyone there. I never found any proof that someone had been watching us. And my son never spoke about it again. But for a long time after that, I could not look up that path at dusk without feeling like something might be standing just beyond where the light ended. I was standing in my bathroom eating some food when it happened. I live alone, so there was nobody else in the house with me. It was one of those completely normal, boring moments that should not have turned into anything memorable. I was not doing anything strange. I was not trying to contact anything, looking for ghosts or sitting in the dark trying to scare myself. I was just eating, standing near the sink, probably half distracted and thinking about something else. The bathroom was normal. The lights were on. Nothing felt strange when I walked in. The counter had the usual things on it, and my blow dryer was sitting there with its cord hanging over the edge of the bathroom counter. It was not plugged in or being used. The cord was just hanging down the way cords sometimes do when you leave something on the counter. There was nothing unusual about it. I had seen it sitting there 100 times before. I was standing about 4 feet away from it. Because I was eating, I was not staring directly at the blow dryer or its cord. I was near the sink, doing my own thing, in my own house, where I should have been completely alone. The room was quiet. There was no wind coming through a window. No fan was running. No one was walking past me. No pet was brushing against the counter. There was nothing nearby that should have made the cord move. Then, all at once, the blow-dryer cord started swinging back and forth. It was not a small little movement. Either it did not just shift slightly the way a cord might settle after being touched. It actually began swinging, back and forth, like someone had reached out, grabbed it, and given it a push. For a second, I just stared at it. My brain did not immediately jump to ghosts. It tried to find a normal answer first, because that is what you do when something strange happens in your own home. You look for air movement. You look for a window. You think maybe you bumped the counter without realizing it. Maybe the dryer was unstable. Maybe the cord had been twisted and finally unwound. Maybe something fell or shifted on the counter. But none of those things fit. I was standing several feet away. I had not touched the counter. I had not brushed against the cord. There was no breeze. The bathroom door was not moving. The air felt still. The cord was not slowly untangling or settling into a new position. It was swinging back and forth with enough movement that it immediately caught my attention. I remember watching it and feeling that strange, cold pause in my body. It is not exactly fear at first. It is more like your mind stopping for a second because reality has just done something that does not match the rules you expect. You know an object can move. Of course it can. But you also know that objects need a reason to move. A hand, a breeze, a vibration, a force of some kind. And there was no force that I could see. The cord kept swinging. It went back and forth in front of the counter, moving in a clear rhythm. I could see the hanging cord curve away, then return, then swing the other direction. It was close enough that I could have reached out and grabbed it, but I did not. I just stood there, holding my food, watching it like an idiot, because I could not process what I was seeing. I was alone. That was the thought that made the moment different. If somebody else had been in the bathroom, I could have blamed them. Maybe they had brushed past it. Maybe they had moved the counter. Maybe they had grabbed the cord as a joke. But there was nobody there. I live alone. There was no one hiding behind the shower curtain, no one standing in the doorway, no one in the hallway. The bathroom was small enough that there was nowhere for anyone to be without me noticing. It was just me, the sink, the counter, the blow dryer, and this cord swinging in the air. Then it stopped, not gradually. That is the part that really got me. The cord did not swing slower and slower until it naturally settled. It did not wobble a little, lose momentum, and come to rest. It stopped suddenly, completely, as if someone had reached out and caught it with their hand. 1 second, it was moving back and forth. The next second, it was perfectly still. It was so abrupt that I felt my stomach drop. The movement had already been strange, but the stop was worse. If it had slowly died out, I might have been able to tell myself it had just been a cord settling or moving because of something I had not noticed. But the way it stopped did not look natural. It looked controlled. It looked like something had made it swing. Then decided it had gotten my attention. Then stopped it. I just stood there staring at the cord. For a moment, I did not know what I was supposed to do. It sounds stupid when I say it now, because it was only a blow-dryer cord. Nothing jumped out at me. Nothing spoke. Nothing touched me. There was no face in the mirror or shadow in the corner. But when you are alone in your home and an object moves in a way that should not be possible, it changes how the whole room feels. The bathroom suddenly did not feel empty anymore. That is the strange part about living alone. Most of the time, you get used to the quiet. You know every sound your place makes. You know the refrigerator clicks sometimes. You know the pipes knock. You know the floor creaks. You know which doors stick and which windows rattle. Living alone teaches you to recognize the normal noises of your home because there is nobody else around to make them. But it also means that when something happens that is not normal, you have nobody else there to confirm it. Nobody to say, "Did you see that?" Nobody to laugh and tell you it was probably the air conditioner. Nobody to watch it with you. You are left alone with your own explanation, and sometimes your own explanation is not very comforting. I looked around the bathroom after the cord stopped. I checked the window. Nothing. I checked the counter. Nothing looked unstable. I looked at the dryer itself. It was sitting where it had been. It did not look like it had slid or fallen or been disturbed. The cord was hanging there perfectly still, as if it had never moved at all. I remember wanting to touch it, but also not wanting to touch it. That is such a weird reaction, but I think anyone who has had something strange happen knows what I mean. Part of you wants to test it. You want to grab the cord and see if it is tangled. You want to shake the counter. You want to recreate the motion and find a normal answer. But another part of you does not want to interact with it because you do not know what will happen if you do. What if it starts swinging again? What if something else moves? What if the moment was not over? I did eventually move closer because I had to. I was still standing there in the bathroom, and I was not going to stay frozen forever. I looked at the cord carefully. I lifted it a little and let it go to see how it behaved. Of course, when I moved it myself, it swung normally. It slowed normally. It came to rest normally. Nothing about the cord itself seemed broken or unusual. That almost made it worse. If it had been caught on something, twisted tightly, or moving because of a loose counter, maybe I would have had an explanation. But it looked ordinary. It acted ordinary when I touched it. It was only that one moment, while I was standing a few feet away, when it swung by itself, and then stopped, like someone had caught it. After that, I kept thinking about it. I tried to convince myself it could have been air pressure. Maybe the air conditioner came on somewhere in the house. Maybe a door shut in another room and created a draft. Maybe the bathroom door moved slightly. Maybe I had breathed in a way that moved the cord even though I was 4 feet away. Maybe the cord had been twisted and released tension at the exact moment I looked at it. All of those explanations were possible in the most technical sense. Things move. Air moves. Houses shift. Objects settle. I know that. I am not saying physics stopped working in my bathroom. But none of those explanations felt right. The cord did not move like it was being gently pushed by air. It moved like it had been intentionally swung. And it did not stop like a cord naturally stops. It stopped like someone had grabbed it. That is why I believe I have a ghost. I know that statement sounds bold, especially over something as small as a blow-dryer cord moving. I know people hear ghost and immediately picture dramatic horror movie scenes. Doors slamming, voices whispering, figures at the end of a bed. But I do not think that is always how strange things happen. Sometimes it is little things. Something goes missing and turns up in an obvious place. A light flickers at the wrong moment. You hear footsteps when you know nobody else is home. An object moves just enough that you cannot fully explain it. And sometimes a blow-dryer cord swings in an empty bathroom. I cannot say I know who or what it is. I do not have some tragic history attached to the apartment or house. I do not know if someone died there. I do not know if the ghost is connected to the building, the land, a previous owner, or something that followed me from somewhere else. I have no name for it, no story, no clear reason. But I do not feel like it is trying to hurt me. That is important. There is a difference between feeling scared of something and feeling threatened by it. In that moment, yes, I was startled. I was definitely creeped out. I did not like standing in my bathroom watching an object move by itself, but I did not get the feeling that it wanted to hurt me. It did not throw the dryer. It did not pull anything off the counter. It did not make the lights go out. It did not touch me. It just moved the cord, stopped it, and left me standing there wondering whether I had lost my mind. Since then, I have thought of it as a ghost because I do not know what else to call it. And honestly, we have gotten along so far. That may sound ridiculous, but it is the truth. If there is something in my home, it has not been aggressive. It has not made me feel unsafe enough to leave. It has not done anything that made me feel like I needed to call someone or get rid of it. It is more like I share the space with something quiet and strange, something that occasionally reminds me it might be there. I do not talk to it much. I am not trying to invite it into my life more than it already is. I do not hold seances or ask it to give me signs. I do not want to make a bigger deal out of it than necessary. But I also do not walk around terrified every day. I live my life. I use the bathroom. I dry my hair. I make food. I go to sleep. And every now and then, I remember that one moment when the cord began moving and then stopped in a way I cannot explain. Sometimes I wonder whether it was trying to say hello. That is probably the least scary version of it. Maybe whatever it is just wanted me to notice it. Maybe it had been around before, and that was the first time it did something obvious enough for me to see. Maybe it was bored. Maybe it was curious. Maybe it was a random burst of energy or something I do not understand. I do not know. But the movement felt deliberate. That is the word I always come back to. Deliberate. The cord was hanging over the counter. It started swinging. It went back and forth. Then it stopped suddenly. There was no panic in the room, no accident, no reason for it to happen. It was too clean, too simple, too controlled. I have replayed the scene enough times that I can still picture it exactly. I was near the sink, eating. The blow dryer was on the counter. The cord was hanging down in front of it. Then it moved. I looked over. It kept moving. Then it stopped. That was it. But that was enough. Living alone means you learn how much you depend on normal patterns. You expect the objects in your home to stay where you leave them. You expect cords to hang still unless you touch them. You expect silence to mean nobody is there. When one of those patterns breaks, even for a few seconds, the whole place can feel different afterward. I still use that bathroom. I still use the blow dryer. The cord still hangs where it hangs. Sometimes I look at it before I leave the room. Sometimes I catch myself waiting to see if it will move again. It never has in the exact same way. At least, not yet. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe there is a completely normal reason that I just have not figured out. Maybe the cord twisted, released, and happened to stop at the perfect moment. But I have watched cords swing before. I know what normal movement looks like. I know what it looks like when something loses momentum. I know that objects do not usually stop as if a hand has reached out and caught them. That is why I do not doubt what I saw. I have a ghost. And so far, we have gotten along just fine. I am not a superstitious person. I do not usually believe in ghosts, curses, signs, or anything paranormal. I have always been the kind of person who looks for a normal explanation first, even when something feels strange. I know people can mishear things, misunderstand what they see in the dark, or build stories around memories that happened when they were young. But there was one place I lived as a kid that has stayed in the back of my mind for years. It was a small, run-down house a little past the base of a mountain in Chatsworth, Georgia. I do not know whether it was the town itself, the area around the mountain, or simply the way I felt as a kid, but Chatsworth always seemed eerie to me. The air felt thick there. Not literally, not in a way I could explain with weather, but in a way that made everything feel heavier. Quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt watchful. Even during the daytime, there was something about the trees, the hills, and the empty spaces between houses that made the town feel older and stranger than other places. Our house was in bad shape because my family had been going through hard times for a long time. It was one of those homes where you could tell people were doing their best to survive, but there was never enough money, energy, or stability to make things feel secure. Things were worn down. Repairs got put off. The house was not really a place that made you feel protected from the outside world. Behind the backyard, maybe 10 feet past the edge of it, there was a small creek. It was not a huge river or anything dramatic. It was just a little creek running behind the house, close enough that we could hear it from the back bedrooms when everything else was quiet. Sometimes it was peaceful. During the day, we would play near it, climb around the trees, look for rocks, mess around near the water, and do all the things kids do when they are bored and there's a patch of woods nearby. But at night, the creek felt different. My sisters and I had separate bedrooms at the back of the house. Those rooms were closest to the creek, and when we lay in bed at night, we could hear everything that happened behind the house more clearly than anyone else. The sound of water moving over rocks, branches shifting, animals rustling in the brush, sometimes the wind, sometimes rain. And sometimes people, a few times a month, one or more of us would wake up to the sound of people talking near the creek. The conversations were never clear enough for us to understand every word. It sounded like two people talking quietly, but not in a normal, casual way. It was usually hushed, like they did not want to be overheard. Sometimes it sounded tense. Sometimes it sounded angry. There were nights when the voices seemed calm but serious, and other nights when it sounded like two people were arguing in low, aggressive voices. What made it stranger was that it did not always sound like the same people. One night, it might sound like two men. Another night, it sounded like a man and a woman. Sometimes the voices sounded older, sometimes younger. Sometimes one voice would be quiet and the other would be loud. We did not know who they were. We could never see them from the windows, and we were kids. So we were not about to go outside in the middle of the night to investigate a dark creek behind a rundown house. Usually, after the talking, or sometimes while it was still happening, we would hear heavy things being thrown into the creek. Not one little object, multiple things. Heavy splashes, hard impacts, the sound of something hitting rocks, branches, or water. Sometimes it sounded like a bag being dropped. Sometimes it sounded like something solid being thrown from the bank into the creek bed. It happened enough times that it became part of the background weirdness of living there. We always tried to explain it normally. Maybe people were dumping trash. Maybe someone was throwing old furniture, broken tools, or bags of garbage into the creek. It was awful to think about. But people do litter. Maybe people from nearby houses used the creek as a dumping spot. Maybe someone had a party down there and we were only hearing pieces of it through the trees. That was the explanation we went with, because it was the easiest one. People littered. People argued. People threw things into the creek. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible. Still, the sounds made us uneasy. It was one thing to hear a car pass by late at night or someone walking near a road, but hearing quiet conversations behind your house, close to your bedroom, followed by heavy objects being thrown into the water, was different. It felt like there was always something happening just beyond a tree line that we were not meant to see. Then one day, something happened to my sister. We were outside playing near the creek. It was daytime, and there was nothing especially scary about being back there when the sun was out. The creek looked normal. The trees looked normal. The backyard was just our backyard. There were felled trees near the edge of the creek. They had been stacked up in a messy pile, probably from old clearing work or storm damage. My sister was balancing on top of them, stepping from one trunk to another, the way kids do when they think they are invincible. Then she fell. She ended up in the creek. It was scary for a second because she went down hard, but she was a good swimmer, and the creek was not deep enough to sweep her away. I got to her, and we got out fine. She was wet, shaken up, and angry about falling, but she was okay, except she had a cut on the back of her head. It was not a massive injury, but it was enough to make everyone stop and pay attention. My parents and I assumed she hit a rock, a branch, or some piece of trash on the way down. That was the obvious explanation. She had fallen from a pile of logs into a creek. There were plenty of things she could have struck. But my sister insisted that someone had thrown something at her. She said something hit her in the back of the head before she fell, or as she was falling. She said it did not feel like she simply lost her balance. She believed someone had thrown an object from somewhere nearby. At the time, I did not know what to think. We looked around, but did not find anyone. There were trees, brush, and the creek. There were plenty of places someone could hide if they wanted to, but there was no sign of a person standing close enough to throw anything. No one came out. No one spoke. No one ran away where we could see them. We still assumed she had hit something. It was the sensible answer. But she never changed her mind. She always said someone hit her. After that, the strange things near the creek got worse. For the next few weeks, when we played in the backyard or near the trees, we started finding little bags tied to low branches. They were not high up in the trees. They were hanging low enough that a kid could see them and reach them. Sometimes they were tied to branches close to the ground, almost like someone wanted them to be found. They looked small and ordinary from a distance. Little bags tied off at the top, hanging from a branch. At first, we opened them. Kids are curious. We did not know better. We probably thought they were trash, someone's forgotten things, or maybe something stupid another kid had left behind. We opened the first one, then another, and then another. After the third or fourth bag, we never opened one again, because the things inside were disgusting and wrong in a way I still cannot fully explain. The first bag had what looked like random pieces of meat inside, not normal packaged food, not something that looked like it had fallen out of a grocery bag. It was loose, wet, and hard to identify. There were strange bits of tissue. It looked old. It smelled bad enough that we knew it was not something we should be touching. One of the bags was mostly hair. There was a clump or mass of hair inside, mixed with some white liquid-looking substance. I still do not know what it was. I do not know whether it was animal hair, human hair, some kind of rotten material, or something else completely ordinary that looked worse because we were children and did not understand it. But at the time, it scared us. It was not something you expect to find tied to a branch at the edge of a creek. The worst bag was the third one we opened. Inside was something that looked like a chicken liver or some other small organ floating in red liquid. There were also teeth in it, molar teeth, a bunch of them. I remember staring at the bag and trying to understand what I was looking at. They looked like real teeth, not tiny animal teeth, not seeds, not pebbles, teeth. There was something about seeing them in that liquid that made all of us go quiet. We were kids, but we knew enough to know it was not normal. It was not a joke we understood. It was not trash in a usual sense. It was something someone had intentionally tied up and hung in a tree near the creek. After that, we did not touch any more bags. We would see them sometimes, tied low in the branches, and we would leave them alone. We did not want to know what was inside. We did not want to bring them into the house. We did not want to get close enough to smell them. We also did not tell our mom. Not really. We told her about my sister falling into the creek because she had a cut on her head, and there was no way to hide that. But we did not tell her about the bags, the hair, the liquid, the meat, or the teeth. We were kids. We did not know how to explain it. Maybe we were worried we would get in trouble for playing too close to the creek. Maybe we thought nobody would believe us. Maybe we were afraid that if we told an adult, it would become more real, so we kept it to ourselves. Then, not long after all of that, everything changed. One day, we came home from school and our things were packed. Not neatly packed into boxes like a planned move, not the kind of packing where people talk about a new house, label things, decide what to keep, and make plans. Our belongings were shoved into a few grocery bags and suitcases. It was sudden. It felt rushed. Our mom took us to live with our aunt. At the time, I did not fully understand why. As a kid, you notice when adults are upset, but you do not always understand the reasons. You know something has changed, but you do not know what happened before you got home. You do not know what bills were overdue, what arguments happened, what fear someone was carrying, or how long they had been trying to keep everything together. We left that house. Our mom moved back in with our grandmother. And after that, she fell into a deep depression that lasted for years. She was not the same for a long time. I want to be careful about how I talk about that, because my mother was a beautiful woman, inside and out. She had been through hard things. Our family had been through chronic hardship. She had struggles that deserved compassion, not some creepy explanation. It hurts me to imagine anyone turning her pain into a ghost story or a curse story. But I cannot ignore the timing either. We had lived in that house. We heard those strange conversations by the creek. My sister had gotten hurt and believed someone threw something at her. We found those bags tied to branches, filled with things that felt wrong and disturbing. Then we left suddenly, and my mother's mental health collapsed afterward. I have wondered all my life whether any of it was connected. Not in a way where I truly believe some supernatural force caused her depression. I do not want to believe that. I know depression is real. Trauma is real. Financial stress, unstable housing, family hardship, grief, exhaustion, fear, and 1,000 other things can break someone down over time. My mother's pain had real causes. It was not because of a bag in a tree or a strange creek behind a house. But when you are a child, you connect events because you do not have the full picture. You remember the weird things. You remember the fear. You remember watching your mom change. And your mind tries to make a story out of it. Because stories feel easier than accepting that life can be cruel for no clear reason. Maybe the people near the creek were just dumping trash. Maybe the bags were related to animal remains, hunting, fishing, or some cruel prank. Maybe the teeth were fake, animal teeth, or old discarded dental material. Maybe someone in the area was doing something disturbing but entirely human. There are plenty of people who do strange and harmful things without anything paranormal involved. Maybe my sister really did hit her head on a rock. Maybe the conversations we heard were normal arguments carried through the trees at night. Maybe the creek made everything sound closer and more mysterious than it was. All of that is possible. But I still remember the bags. I still remember how low they hung from the branches, as if they were meant to be noticed by someone walking near the creek. I still remember opening them before we knew better. I remember the smell. I remember the hair. I remember the white liquid. I remember the red liquid and the molar teeth. And I still remember how quickly our lives changed after that. The house is gone from my life now, but the feeling of it has never completely left. The creek especially comes back in my mind sometimes. I can still imagine it behind the backyard, close enough to hear from the bedroom. I can still picture the woods at night, the dark water moving, the voices talking low somewhere beyond the trees. I do not know what was happening there. I do not know who was leaving those bags. I do not know whether anyone was watching us while we played by the creek. And I do not know whether my mother ever saw or felt something in that house that we did not understand. But I do know this. Whatever happened there, it should not become the explanation for what happened to her later. My mother was not weak. She was not cursed. She was not destroyed by a haunted house. She was a person who had been through too much. She was a beautiful woman who deserved help, rest, stability, and kindness. It breaks my heart that she suffered for so long after we left. She deserved better than the life that kept pressing down on her. Maybe that is why the memories bother me so much. The strange things around the creek are disturbing, but they are easier to hold at a distance. They are mysteries. They are childhood memories that might have an explanation I will never find. My mother's suffering was real, and that is the part that stays with me most. I can wonder about the voices in the woods, the heavy things being thrown into the creek, and the little bags tied to branches. I can wonder whether they were related to something darker than we understood. But I never want to use those events to reduce my mother's life to a scary story. She was more than the hard years. She was more than the depression. She was more than the house we left behind. And even though I still do not understand what happened near that creek, I know she deserves to be remembered with love, not fear. When I was in the military, I was stationed at a base in Italy that had originally been a German air base during World War II. Even though decades had passed since the war, you could still feel the history of the place everywhere you went. The buildings had been reused, repaired, repainted, and modernized in certain ways, but they still carried the shape of what they had been before. Our weapons magazines had old German graffiti on the walls. Some of it was faded, some of it was hidden in corners, and some of it looked like it had survived simply because nobody had bothered to paint over it. The barracks we lived in had once been German barracks too. You could walk through hallways, sleep in rooms, stand outside near old walls, and know that soldiers from another army had done the same thing generations earlier. Most of the time, nobody really thought about it too much. When you are stationed somewhere, it becomes normal quickly. You get used to the buildings, the routines, the weather, the schedules, the long shifts, the bad coffee, the card games, and the conversations that happen late at night after work. The history is there, but it becomes background noise. You might mention it to someone new or point out an old marking on a wall, but then you go back to whatever you were doing. Still, there were moments when the place felt older than it should have. The old barracks looked especially strange at night. During the day, they were just military buildings. At night, when the halls were quiet and the outside lights barely reached the far edges of the compound, they had a different feeling. Rain made it worse. Wind made it worse. Thunder made it worse. The old walls and dark windows made the whole place feel like it was still holding on to things nobody could see. One night, after I got off the night shift, a group of us ended up hanging out in one of the gazebos near the barracks. There were probably around a dozen of us, all young, 20-something, tired from work but not ready to go straight to bed. That was normal after a night shift. You finish at midnight. Your body is exhausted, but your mind is still awake. and nobody wants to sit alone in their room immediately. So people gather somewhere, smoke cigarettes, drink something, play cards, talk about home, talk about work, complain about leadership, make stupid jokes, and try to come down from the shift. That night, the weather was horrible. It had been raining hard for hours. Not just steady rain, but a real downpour. The kind that pounds against the pavement and makes everything shine under the streetlights. The gazebo roof gave us some cover, but the wind kept blowing mist and spray inside. The rain was so loud at times that we had to raise our voices to hear each other. Every few minutes, there would be a flash of lightning. The entire area would light up in a hard, cold burst, and then the darkness would close over everything again. A second later, thunder would roll across the base. Sometimes it was distant. Sometimes it was close enough that the gazebo seemed to shake. We were sitting around playing cards and talking. Nothing serious, just trying to pass time. The barracks were nearby, maybe 10 feet or so from where we were sitting. We could see the outline of the building through the rain whenever lightning flashed, but most of the time it was just darkness, wet pavement, and the sound of water hitting everything around us. Then there was one lightning strike that was different. The flash was incredibly bright. It was one of those flashes that makes the whole world look frozen for a split second. The rain becomes visible in the air. The ground shines white. Every building, tree, and piece of equipment stands out sharply before darkness returns. The thunder came almost immediately after. A loud crack. And all of us went silent. It was not planned. Nobody said anything. Nobody told everyone to stop talking. The card game just stopped in the middle of whatever we were doing. It was like every person in that gazebo had suddenly felt the same thing. Someone said, "Did y'all see that?" Nobody laughed. Nobody asked what they meant. Because we all knew. Every single one of us had seen the exact same thing. Standing outside the barracks, maybe 10 feet away from us, was a German soldier. He was only visible during the flash of lightning. But that one flash was enough. I remember him now like I saw him yesterday. He was standing in the rain with his head lowered, like he was looking at his boots or staring down at the ground. He did not move. He did not look toward us. He did not raise his head when the lightning struck. He just stood there, completely still, while rain poured over him. The first thing I noticed was the helmet. It was unmistakably old military gear. Not modern, not a costume from a party, not anything that belonged on a present-day base. The helmet had a decal on the side, a white eagle shape, and water was running steadily off the brim. I can still picture the rain streaming from it in one continuous line. He wore a camouflage rain parka over his uniform. Over the parka, he had an ammunition belt, and it was held up with suspenders crossing over his body. The straps, the belt, the wet fabric, all of it looked solid and real in that split second. The rain seemed to soak into the material. His boots were dark leather, heavy and rain-soaked, with no visible laces. They came up to around his knees, and resting on his shoulder was a rifle, a Mauser. Everything about him looked like he had stepped directly out of the 1940s and into that storm. It was not a vague shadow. It was not a shape in the rain. It was a person, a soldier, a German soldier standing outside old German barracks on a former German air base. Then the lightning was gone. The darkness came back, and he was gone too. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The rain kept falling. The thunder rolled away in the distance. The cards sat on the table, half played. Someone was still holding a hand of cards, but had stopped mid-motion. A few people were staring toward the barracks, trying to see through the dark and rain. But there was nothing there. No person, no shadow, No movement. No footsteps in the puddles. No sound except the storm. Then everyone started talking at once. Not shouting exactly, but speaking fast, asking each other what they saw. It was that kind of panic conversation where nobody wants to be the first person to say something unbelievable, but everyone is desperate to know whether the others saw it too. One person described the helmet. Another described the rain parka. Someone mentioned the ammunition belt. Someone else said they saw the rifle. Another person described the boots. The details matched. All of us had seen the same soldier. Not just a vague military-looking figure, not just someone standing in the rain. We all had the same image in our heads. Head down. Old German uniform. Rain running off the helmet. Rifle on the shoulder. Standing right outside the barracks. That was the part that made it impossible to dismiss. If it had only been me, I could have blamed the storm. I could have blamed being tired after night shift. I could have blamed lightning, shadows, rain, or my brain, filling in details because I knew the history of the base. I could have told myself that I saw a shape for half a second, and my imagination turned it into a wee soldier. But there were around a dozen of us, and every one of us saw him. Every one of us described him the same way. Nobody had time to influence anyone else. The lightning flash was too quick. Nobody said, "I saw a German soldier," and then let the rest of the group build on it. We all went silent before anyone spoke, because we had all recognized what we were looking at. Then, almost without discussing it, everyone left. We immediately vacated the area. There was no argument about staying. Nobody said, "Let's go check it out." Nobody wanted to walk over to the barracks wall and inspect the ground. Nobody wanted to stand there in the rain, pretending it was nothing. We got up and left. I do not remember who grabbed the cards. I do not remember whether anyone folded the chairs or cleaned up. I only remember the sudden urgency to get away from that gazebo. 1 second, we were a group of young soldiers hanging out after shift, playing cards and waiting for the storm to pass. The next, nobody wanted to be within 10 feet of that barracks. The walk back felt longer than it should have. Every flash of lightning made people look around. Every sound in the rain made someone turn their head. The entire base suddenly felt different. It was no longer just a posting in Italy. It was no longer just old buildings with faded graffiti and wartime history. For that night, it felt like the past had stood up in front of us. I thought about the soldier for a long time afterward. What was he doing there? Why was his head down? Why was he standing in the rain? Why did he appear only in the lightning? Why did all of us see the exact same details? Those questions stayed with me because there was never an answer. Maybe there was a logical explanation. I have considered plenty over the years. Lightning can create strange visual effects. A bright flash can freeze rain, shadows, and objects in a way that makes them look like something else. A tree branch, a sign, a person's shaped reflection or equipment near the barracks could have looked like a soldier for an instant. But that does not explain why so many people describe the same uniform details. Maybe there was a reenactor or someone wearing old gear. Maybe some person had been standing outside in the storm as a prank. But why? It was pouring rain. It was the middle of the night, and whoever it was would have had to disappear instantly after the lightning, without leaving any sign or making any sound. Maybe we were all tired, and our minds were primed by the history of the place. We knew it had once been a German base. We knew the barracks were old. We had seen German writing on the walls. Maybe the storm, the darkness, the setting, and the sudden flash of lightning created the same idea in all of our minds. That is probably the most reasonable explanation. But I have never fully believed it. because the details were too specific. The rainwater rolling off the brim of the helmet, the White Eagle decal, the camouflage parka, the ammunition belt and suspenders, the high leather boots, the Mauser rifle resting on his shoulder. Those are not details I think a dozen tired people would all imagine in the same second. The figure did not look like a blurry ghost from a movie. He did not glow, he did not float, he did not reach toward us or make any sound. He simply stood there in the storm, soaked through, head lowered, as if he had been there for decades waiting for someone to notice him. That is somehow more unsettling than if he had done something dramatic. The fact that he did nothing made it worse. He did not acknowledge us. He did not look up. He did not move. He was just there, standing outside the old barracks where men like him had once slept, worked, waited, and probably feared for their lives. I have wondered whether he was connected to that exact building. Maybe someone had died there. Maybe someone had been stationed there and never left in whatever way people mean when they talk about ghosts. Maybe the place held on to something from the war. Maybe the old walls, the graffiti, the barracks, and the storm all became part of one moment that made us see something from the past. I do not know. I am not saying I know it was a ghost. I am not saying it was a spirit trapped on the base. I am not saying the dead return in uniforms and stand outside barracks during storms. All I know is that I was there. I was sitting in a gazebo with around a dozen people after night shift. It was raining so hard that we could barely hear each other. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, everyone went quiet. And for one split second, a German soldier stood 10 feet away from us. Then, the dark came back, and he was gone. The next day, people tried to talk about it casually. That is what military people do sometimes. You make jokes about something because the alternative is admitting it scared you. Someone might have said it was just a storm. Someone else might have said maybe he was checking the barracks. Somebody probably joked that he was late for formation. But no one really laughed, because we all remembered what we saw. And none of us wanted to go back to that gazebo during another storm. Even now, I can still picture the scene. The rain falling sideways, the metal roof of the gazebo shaking under the downpour, cards spread out on the table, a dozen tired young people trying to relax after work. Then the lightning, the soldier, the helmet, the rifle, the rain pouring off the brim, and the instant silence that followed when everyone realized they had seen the same impossible thing. Some experiences fade with time. This one never has. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.